Good evening. Welcome to Beyond the Gatekeepers. I am Bishop-elect Vanessa Brown, and I am your host and moderator for this evening. I'm so happy to be here with you on tonight. We have a great conversation set up for you. And before we do that, you know we like to shout you out. We want to know where you're coming from. And so I see people here already. Chuck Hunt, Monroe, Louisiana is in the house. New York City is here. Apollo, I see you. God bless you. So happy. Please do me a favor. We have several social media platforms tonight. Facebook Live here on Beyond the Gatekeepers. We have it also on Bishop Yvette Flunder's page, as well as Instagram and Twitter and YouTube. So we got audiences everywhere. And so we want you to like and share. Make sure that somebody is hearing this conversation tonight. Good evening from Ohio. God bless you. Thank you for being here tonight. Kyleen, Texas is here. San Francisco Bay Area is in the house. Puerto Rico is in the house. Lovely. Minnesota is in the house. Stafford, Virginia is in the house. Paris, California is here. Flint, Michigan is in the house. I see you, Darnell Ishmael. God bless you. Connecticut is in the house. South Carolina is in the house. Oklahoma City is in the house. Baltimore is in the house. South Jersey, listen, we live. We're all over. Chicago, Illinois is in the house. I love how you do what you do. Do me a favor. I see my brethren is here, Keith Sibley from SGL Cruise. God bless you, Keith. We're glad that you're here. Atlanta is in the house. We can't go nowhere without the ATL. And we love that. Again, Oakland, California, Louisiana, again, is here. So happy for all of the people from representing your state, your country. We are worldwide as well, and we are excited. Also, you can catch us on the radio. We're so happy that we are on online radio. And so Bullet in Flight Productions is where you can find us on Thursday nights in case you miss Wednesday. Landover, Maryland is here. Los Angeles again. California is here. Boston, listen, the East Coast is riding through here too. New Jersey is here. We are excited. Again, we're asking you to like and share for this conversation. There's so much to talk about. And tonight, we're going to be talking to the author, Josef Sorett. But before we do that, let me just start bringing in everybody that's going to be on the show tonight. We have a wonderful, wonderful opportunity tonight. My brother is here, friend and brother, Bishop-elect Troy Sanders. He's helping to move this conversation along on tonight. He is the senior pastor of Rehoboth Fellowship of Atlanta. He is also an Episcopal assistant for the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, and we are excited about his presence. Bishop-elect Troy, please greet our platform tonight.
What a joy it is to be with everyone, Bishop-elect Vanessa and all of our co-hosts and co-panelists. I'm excited about the conversation. For so long, we have not been able to have these robust and open dialogues around sexuality in the Black church and church in general. So I'm here for the conversation and up for it. Looking forward to it. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for your yes, sir. We appreciate you. Philly is here. Yeah, Missouri is here. Somebody said New York City. Yes, we are in the house tonight. And let me bring on our next person. He is not a guest. He's with us on a consistent basis. And we love him. We love his commentary. We love the information and the wisdom and the insight that he gives. He is Bishop Carlton D. Pearson, author, progressive spiritual teacher, and thought leader. Bishop Pearson, will you come and greet our platform tonight?
Well, happy Wednesday night to all of you. It's snow and ice here in Tulsa, but I changed rooms so I could accommodate tonight's conversation. It promises to be quite intriguing. Even to have Bishop Troy here means the degrees is going to go up about 50 because he don't hold nothing back. But sexuality, sensuality, sociology, and spirituality are inextricably connected in any culture, whether they acknowledge it or not. The church, particularly the Black church, has denied half of that, the sensuality and the sexuality. We like the sociology, and of course we emphasize the spiritualities to hide what appears to be the weaknesses in sociology, sexuality, and sensuality. I think our guest tonight will bring out some very interesting points, and we will corroborate and learn as we listen and share. It's going to be a great night. Call your mom and them. Tell them to tune in. You're going to love it.
Thank you, Bishop. And tonight, our guest, he is a friend, and I just enjoy his presence. He has a great mind. He is a brilliant man in the person of Josef Sorett. He's the professor of religion and African American and African Diaspora studies at Columbia University in New York City. That's how I met him. I am grateful for his presence tonight. Josef, come on and greet our audience tonight.
Good evening, good people. Bishop-elect Vanessa, thank you so much for the invitation. Bishop-elect Troy, pleasure to be with you and meet for the first time. And my former pastor, as I was just saying, from my years in Tulsa in the early 90s, good to be with you, Bishop Pearson, as well. Thank you all for the invitation.
Glad to have you.
You are quite welcome. I want to lay a foundation if I can, and then I'm going to get off to the questions. Again, I see you, Fort Myers, Florida, Rochester, New York. Continue to like and share this conversation. I see you, Yvette. God bless you tonight. Fort Smith, Arkansas is in the house, y'all. They are here to hear this conversation tonight. And so what I want to say is that I know that this book brings together what I consider to be an interdisciplinary roster of scholars, great minds, and practitioners that analyze the politics of sexuality within Black churches and the communities they serve. And so this book is written in essays and in conversations. We have leading writers who are reflecting on how Black churches have participated in recent discussions about issues such as marriage equality, reproductive justice, transgender visibility in American society. And they also consider the varied ways that Black people and groups negotiate the intersections of religion, race, gender, sexuality across historical and contemporary settings. And so, Josef, let's get right to it. My first thing I told you is, let us define Black church.
Oh boy, I don't know if we're going to get beyond that. I think we may get stuck there the whole night, right? And that is, it's great that you start us there, because I think, right, this book its origins were in 2010, right? And this was a few months. Right? So obviously one of the big contexts at the time were debates around what was then called same-sex marriage, which we now think about it under the language of marriage equality. But another debate just earlier that year was following a blog that Princeton professor Eddie Glaude wrote for Huffington Post called "The Black Church is Dead," which sparked a whole set of conversations, right, about what the Black church is. And so I don't know so much that I'll add for a single answer, as I'm sure the other conversation partners tonight have their own take on this, but frame the way in which that category is itself very much a point of debate. Are we talking about the historically Black denominations that trace their origins, many of them back to the age of independence, the founding of independent Black Baptist churches, the AME Church, African Methodist Episcopal Church, with its founding in the seat of independence in Philadelphia in the 1780s, right? These historic Black institutions, denominations, or the emergence of Black Pentecostal denominations at the 20th century, like the Church of God in Christ or the Church of Christ Holiness. So these are historic, independent, Black founded and led churches, right? And some will say, well, what about then Black folk who attend churches in white denominations, right? Are they part of the Black church? If there's a Black majority Methodist congregation, right? How do we think about that? Or what about non-denominational Black churches, right? For most of my young adult life, I attended a non-denominational church, right? Is that not part of the Black church? So I think certainly the dominant definition are these historic Black, primarily Baptist and Methodist denominations. And with that, the advent of independent Black Pentecostal denominations. But I think what the book tries to do, and that's part of why we opt for the language of Black churches in the communities they serve, is to recognize the range of Black Christian institutions and also recognize the many ways in which Black folk connect with those congregations. Not everyone who ends up in a church is a member, right? There are multiple ways about thinking about the connection between Black churches and the communities in which they're located. So I don't know if that makes it more complicated than it answers the question, but I guess that would be my point. How do we keep that complexity alive in ways that reflect the complexity of Black people's real lived experience and Black Christians' real lived experience?
I think it's important that you answered it that way because Black churches, no Black people are monolith, right?
Exactly.
And so it's important that we, navigate these waters in that way. Somebody just put up here on Facebook, you need to include the AME church. Well, the AME church is included, honey. We including everybody, AME, CME, whatever you are, we are including all denominations in this particular conversation because we all don't have the same mind and we all don't mind the same thing, right? And
Absolutely.
so one thing that's in this book, and I think that you told me that the author of this particular piece of it, since it's an anthology of essays, is Professor Michael.
Yes, Michael Brown, which to the comment happens to be the president of the oldest historically Black independent seminary, which also happens to be an AME seminary, Payne Seminary in Ohio, right? So the AME Church is front and center as the leader of that seminary, himself ordained AME clergy, is in the volume. Scholar of New Testament, Michael Joseph Brown, no relation to our host this evening.
Exactly. But it's great because to me, he gives a foundation for this conversation tonight. And the title of his essay, he talks about many voices, inconsistent truths, and a contemporary understanding of Christian sexual practices. And I just want to lift up one line of what he says in here. And he says, for far too long, a veneer of consistency has been placed over a set of inconsistent statements and practices. And what needs examination is how the various forms of sexual expression found in the Bible and the early church manifested themselves and how they allow human beings to flourish or not. He says, if as we have come to understand, sexuality is at the core of our experience of our humanity, then it needs more thoughtful consideration than it is often given in the early church. I think that that's imperative for the conversation tonight. Right? There's a veneer that's been laid on as it relates to what we're supposed to be doing in terms of sex, what we're not supposed to be doing, what is the truth about some things and what the truth is not. Bishop-elect Troy, would you say the same thing?
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you started at that point with Michael Brown's comments, because he went on further, even in that piece around "do it for the Lord," where
Yes.
where he really teases out that notion that while the New Testament really does not lay a firm foundation or definitives around these things, we have in some way come up with these concretized ideologies that don't have necessarily a foundation in what the Bible says, or do it for the Lord. And that whole theme of doing it for the Lord comes up so often in our Christian praxis and vocation. So I'm glad we're starting at that point.
Bishop Pearson, do you have a comment on that?
I would say that, excuse me, first of all, Black is not just a culture or a color, it's an experience. And American Blacks experience their Blackness at a level that even the other countries in the Caribbean and even in South America, where there are also many slaves, none of them were treated with the violence that we were over here. And we were taught our religion, not our spirituality. Blacks were taught their religion from white evangelical Anglo-Saxons, British, European people who emphasized fertility. They saw us as builders and breeders. And so a lot of the psyche over 400 years for African Americans or American Africans is based on a Judeo-Christian, white, Middle Eastern, heavily Jewishly moral standard. And it's not necessarily, early Africans were freer spirits, freer people. We saw spirits in life and everything. But over here, we got jaded by this mentality, the imperialism, the colonialism, that whole mentality of them trying to control us. So whatever we are today, and however we look at our sensuality or our sexuality or our sociology, even our psychology, is based on those roots. It shouldn't be, but that's just the way it is. The Black church in America has been Americanized. And we had to be Americanized and Westernized and colonialized to even be a functioning church. So that we have to start from there and then breed out. Our policies, not just sexual politics, it's sexual policies, most of which are violated, if you be honest, because we have a lot of adults, quote unquote, adultery, fornication, sexual acts within the church. My grandfather was a Pentecostal preacher, and he would sit in church with my father. My father was amused. He would say, "See that sister? I slept with her, and Sister Smith around now. Oh, I had her several times." And he didn't talk about people outside the church. The sexuality was all within the church. So that's an important observation. We like to, if we don't quote unquote sin, we sin among each other, so we don't ruin our witness outside the church.
Yeah, basically that's how it was, right?
Yeah.
I want to, before I get into the questions, and I know that you all, if you have questions as well, Bishop-elect Troy, Bishop Carlton, Bishop Pearson, feel free to ask those questions, and as well as to the audience. But before we do that, we want to let you know that we are going to give away 2 books. And so we want to make sure that you put hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers. That's hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers if you want to win a book tonight. But remember, we're also going to take questions. And if you have a question, you have to put the word question in front so that we can recognize that it is a question and not just a statement, so that we can ask that question tonight. And so to our first question, I think, and I received this, it says, why is it that sexuality and holiness are treated as incompatible identities within Black church culture? Josef, you can start off and everybody else can weigh in.
Yeah, well, I think Bishop Pearson got us going in the right direction here, right? And this is, I think, another backdrop for the book, that so when there were these debates around maybe 15, 20 years ago around marriage equality, or same-sex marriage was building, and these legislative campaigns were driving against it, right? Black churches were figured as a scapegoat, right? It was somehow as if Black churches existed in a vacuum outside of the broader culture of American Christianity, right? And so when we think about Black church and its sexual politics, Black church is homophobic, or Black church is whatever it might be, all the kinds of inconsistencies and questions and complexities adheres to American Christianity more broadly. So I'm thinking here in particular of the sort of history of Christianity and colonialism, the history of Christianity in Western thought, right, that narrates a particular history of spirituality as necessarily in opposition to sensuality as necessarily in opposition to sexuality. And then when that weaves through the particular history of race, in a particular imagination of Black folk in American culture, it just gets amplified, right? So I think, yes, certainly there is a sort of set of assumptions that within many Black churches, at least as a set of ideas, if not practices, that body and spirit is fundamentally divided in the same way that we think of sacred and secular as divided. But that is very much part and parcel of a sort of normative notion in the West that is actually no more better adhered to within white churches than it is in Black churches. So yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Bishop-elect, can I just also say that it has rich roots in the schizophrenia of Paul in the New Testament, and the ways in which Paul has this dualism, this image of flesh is bad, spirit is good, which we know he borrowed from a lot of Apollo's writings, and the ways in which that gets infiltrated into the church. So much of our early language and early lessons around sexuality was that if you go please God, you got to deny your flesh, and sex and sexuality and sensuality are pieces of the flesh and they're enemy to God. And this gets teased out. This is the platform that all of these other things can be built upon. So we have to visit that piece as well. Paul got us into a lot of trouble over a lot of stuff, and we still hold Paul in high regard without questioning and saying, what was he trying to work out in his own sexuality? I'll just put that out there.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We started off real good. Bishop Pearson?
The references, that's a great point. I was going to bring it up later anyway, because the modern evangelical churches in America particularly, but not exclusively, has its appraisals of sexuality based on the teachings of Paul and Romans chapter 1, but the whole Romans book where Paul died in Rome. But when we read the book of Romans, we got to understand that he's not talking specifically to Romans, except Roman Jews who converted to Christianity. They're now moved out west, not Jerusalem, and they've adopted the habits and hobbies and the lifestyle of a free spirit people who believed in Venus as a sex goddess, where we get the word venereal or venerable is from Venus, because temple priests and priestesses practiced orgies celebrating genitalia. While we call it Genesis or genetics, they call it genitalia. They have all these statues that are undressed. They're not covering the woman's breast or the male's body. They're not ashamed of their sexuality. They're not ashamed of their sensuality. Paul said they have celebrated the creation over creator, that they were worshiping creation, which was physical beings. And they still do in Europe. And we do too over here in America and in Christianity. We just don't talk about it. Our policies and politics are built around sensuality, looks, 5 senses, and the 6th sense of discernment and intuitiveness. But it's important to realize that everything Paul was saying, that they denied God. He's talking about Jews that grew up in Jewish Jewish religious thinking and now have adopted their secular friends in Europe, their habits and hobbies. And so all of his denunciations are primarily to Jews, not Gentiles, and not the world. The Bible is written by Jews, to Jews, for Jews, about a Jewish understanding of divinity, morality, and psychology. That has to be remembered when you're reading the scriptures in reference to the quote-unquote sexual sins that Paul alluded to. And he also said this, by the way, after he gives a long list of sins in 1 Corinthians 6, he says, all things for me are lawful. I can do anything I want to do. I can sleep with anybody I want. It's just not beneficial. That's right. And then he says the second time, all things for me are lawful. I'm just not going to be commanded by any of them. So he gave us a lot of freedom there in the 6th and 7th chapter of the book of Romans.
That's good, Bishop.
Somebody quicken on that one.
Yeah. So I think the next question would be, Josef, so why is it that the sacred so often signifies qualities of purity, coherence, protection, etc., that are opposed to erotic pursuits and activities which are considered often risky or disruptive? Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid.
Well, you know, you're trying to do some heavy lifting tonight. I don't. It's late. I mean, I think, you know, this is what's interesting. I mean, and in many ways picks up where we just left off, right? And this is, I mean, in some ways I'm thinking more about a different book, my own first book, which edited volume, which looks at, right, basically the ways in which this sort of history that we've talked about, tied to the history of Western thought, history of Christianity, narrates a set of assumptions that sacred versus secular, this is a pure divide, right? That there is a neat distinction, and that is sort of fundamental to the emergence of what we think of as modernity or the modern West or American culture, is this notion of sacred versus a clear and definitive distinction between what constitutes the sacred, what constitutes the secular, what constitutes the clean and the pure, or the spiritual, what constitutes the dirty and the dark and the body. And there's a sort of racialized logic to that sacred and secular. And I think where Black folk fit in relationship to this normative notion of the sacred and secular raises a whole set of interesting questions that is not just about sexuality, but certainly plays out in terms of our assumptions about the sex as race, the sex as dirty, as the sex as something that, to your point, contaminates the pure, the clean, the spiritual. And I think this is where, I mean, there's often an assumption that Black folk exist outside of that norm, or that Black folk fundamentally transgress these lines of purity, right? And that we can explain that because in Africa, there was no neat distinction between sacred and secular. And I think that there is a distinct way in which Black folk negotiate this normative notion of sacred and secular. But there are a whole lot of Black folk that don't necessarily refuse the sacred secular, right? I know there's a lot of folk that really invest in drawing a line between what's holy and what's not. And I don't think that, I think what's interesting is, right, to the earlier point, white folk tried to do a lot of things with Christianity, right? To justify slavery, to suppress the slave right, make a whole set of arguments. And certainly in certain cases, Black folk internalized or ran with those arguments and it did damage. But as we know, Black folk also did a lot of other things with the reinterpreted Christianity, right? Some would argue that Black Christianity constituted its own different religion, right? Black folk flipped the Exodus narrative on top of its head, right? And insisted that no, America was not the promised land, it was Egypt. And that, right, God was going to manifest himself by delivering us out of Egypt. So I think it's one thing to think about that line of sacred and secular and the way it's been utilized to create a caricature of Black life and to do harm to actual Black life. But then it's also interesting to think about the many different ways in which Black folk have flipped the normative script of sacred and secular or taken it up and done something distinct. And that those kinds of different things that Black folk have done with sacred and secular are so fundamental, even if not recognized as such, to what we know to be American culture, right? Whether it be gospel music, whether it be the preaching tradition, whether it be political discourse, right? So much of that is premised upon what Black folk have done in the context often of our churches to remix a set of normative scripts about American life.
Thank you. Bishop-elect Troy?
No, I concur. And I think that the conversation is, for me, it kind of hinges on what will the next frontier of the work be as we move through this, right? Because there's still so much more work to be done. And I think that's the question that I wanted to ask Josef at some point tonight. Like, what do you perceive that as being the next frontier of the work, particularly within our marginalized communities?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is, I think this is, one thing, and Bishop-elect Vanessa, you and I were talking about this a little bit. I think you're absolutely right, Bishop-elect Troy. This book, this edited volume, is just the start of a conversation. And while there are however many chapters, I don't know it off the top of my head, but there's about
280 pages.
That's 280 pages. There are, how many? There's 5 parts and 12 chapters, right? And they're by a range of different authors on a range of different subjects. And what it's meant to do, rather than advance a sort of singular definitive argument where now we once and for all can put to rest and best understand the sexual politics of Black churches, is invite the next generation of work. And it's meant to, in fact, model in the range of voices, the kind of conversation that you're talking about. I recall we hosted a conference at Columbia in 2014, Are the Gods Afraid of Black Sexuality? And one of the panels featured a bunch of filmmakers curated by Duke professor Mark Anthony Neal as the moderator. And one of those filmmakers is somebody I know you all know well, Yorba Berishan, who had then her documentary was The New Black, which followed the marriage equality debate and campaign in Prince George's County. And one of the things she said at that time was what she meant by the new black was not to suggest gay is the new black, right? That was not the point, even though that was the language at the time, right? And we ought to raise a whole set of questions by positioning gay as somehow oppositional to black, right? Those two things are not at odds with one another. But one thing that stuck with me with what Yorba said back then was that what the film was supposed to also capture was the new kinds of conversations that were already taking place within the context of Black communities that were much more complicated than the very idea of pitting gay versus Black, right? That these conversations have always been central within our communities, across different kinds of Christian communities, Black, white, and other. And so what the book hopefully does in the chapters on Bible by Michael Joseph Brown and Nisha Jr. is invite and try to hopefully bring more attention to the range of work that's been being done for some time and invite new work in biblical studies. Chapters on preaching by Brad Braxton and Luke Powery, right? There's a set of folks who've been preaching for years on questions of sexuality and in the face of great risk, right? And so how do we create a space for a range of different kinds of sermons that move the conversation to a new step of a complexity? And so I hope the book does that, is create a space for more work, but also capture the fact that work has been done for a long time on these subjects, just hasn't necessarily always received the broader hearing that it deserves.
Thank you for that, because I think it's not just, as Bishop-elect Troy said, to move the conversation along. I think we have to think about the generation that's coming up who are, we talk about things in a binary form, and they're not thinking like that, right? They are thinking very non-binary. They're thinking very polyamorous. These are things that we have to talk about, and they still love God, and they still love Jesus, and they still want to worship, and they still want to have a place to praise God at. And most of them are not coming to the churches because it is shunned and frowned upon. This young lady here in this statement, she says, I think, this is Kristen Walker, it's the impact of white supremacy here in this country that folks in a binary thought process, which kills imagination and nuance. And I think that she's right.
Yeah, this is a tough one, and I want to defer to the other panelists here. Let me shut up, because I could go on here. I don't know if either Bishop-elect Troy or Bishop Pearson want to jump in here. I'm glad to say something. But I think there's a value to that point, but I think there's also a host of sort of other things going on. And white supremacy has a serious and significant history, but I think that white supremacy does not help to explain the full total of who we are as Black folk. And not every decision we make or every thought we think is a result or a product of the impact of white supremacy. Now, which isn't to say we can ever step outside of that particular history. But I think what Black folk do culturally, politically, is often much more creative than the sum total of the damage that white supremacy has done within American life.
So before Bishop Pearson and Bishop Troy weigh in, then can one state white Christianity has psychologically damaged the cultural mindset of people of color to the point that many are still mentally enslaved under white supremacy?
You want me to answer that? I think right. There is no discounting the very real institution, the force of white supremacy in American history and the damage that's done to Black life. One thing I talk to my students about often in the context of an intro to African American studies class is, what exactly do we mean by white supremacy, right? Are we talking about a set of ideas? Like in the context of our conversation, it seems like we're talking a lot about a history of Christian thought that travels from Paul in the Bible forward in other ways. And right, we know there are traditions of reading around Paul, right? Howard Thurman tells the story of his grandmother who couldn't read, right, reading Paul out of the Bible, right? So there's a tradition of scriptural interpretation that would, within Black communities, that reads around and against that white supremacist narrative of ideas. But then when we talk about white supremacy, we're also talking about a set of institutional structures, which is to say, are we talking about slavery? Are we talking about Jim Crow? Are we talking about the various ways in which racial asymmetries continue to shape our lives in the aftermath of the so-called legislation of racial equality following the civil rights movement, right? So part of what I often want to say to my students, and I would say, we have to think in more precise ways about the way in which various ideas and entities and institutions that might be identified as white supremacy shape our lives. At the same time, right, throughout that history, across those institutional and ideological formations, Black folk have always found creative ways to move through and around in the face of that violence. And so I'm very reluctant to reduce the agency and creativity and imagination of Black folk to the sum total of those institutions and ideas that we identify as white supremacy. Because if that was the case, we wouldn't be here having this conversation right now.
Excellent. Bishop-elect Troy, Bishop Pearson, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Josef said. I think that it is very important to name and to sit with the realities of white supremacy. I think, but we also have to hold accountable Black church supremacy and the ways in which that institutional standards and norms have been teased out, that not just the Black church, but for the sake of the conversation about the Black church hinges on this norm of no control. And so it is invested in our DNA as the Black church to give us this set of rules and regulations that say we can do this and cannot do this. And so I think that it's not just an issue of white supremacy, it's an issue of the ways in which the Black church uses control to keep people in line and to keep certain folk at the table and others away from the table, i.e. LGBTQI people, and the ways in which the Black church has pioneered oppression of women, oppression of same-gender loving people. And there's a way that we can put that churchy language on it, but underneath all of that is really the notion of trying to control us. And I think that the Black church has tried for a long time to control what goes on in sensuality and sexuality. Even though we may not say that overtly, we give certain nods to what is acceptable and unacceptable in our churches. Even in inclusive churches, we still give nods to that, and we have to deal with that. That is not at the feet of white supremacy. That's at the feet of control in Black church.
Yes, sir. Yes. Bishop Pearson.
We're not talking so much about Black spirituality in this conversation as much as Black religion. And our religion was taught to us by Quakers and Puritans with a Calvinistic mentality of predestination. Even though they were kind to us, they thought we were predestined to be slaves, that they were predestined to be the rulers. And I've said repeatedly that white evangelicals tend to get King James and King Jesus mixed up. They literally think that King James is the one that gave them the commission to go into all the world and preach the gospel to all the creatures. Now we're creatures. Again, you got to remember, we're always going to be creatures in their mind. And in English, creature is not a human; it's an animal, it's a critter. It's a coon. It's something that's a creepy crawling thing. So Africa, Asia, India, in their minds, to this day, we are not on their level. That supremacy or superiority, white privilege and all is going to be there. So trying to, and they bred us to be breeders. They wanted their animals to have a lot of babies and us to have a lot of slaves. And, they checked our genitalia. They looked at us. They slept with us. White wealthy landowners went down on us and humiliated our men anally and sexually. And there was a lot of sadomasochism in slavery and what happened on those ships, those men at sea. and watching those naked bodies or nearly naked bodies laid side by side for 7 days in urine and defecation and regurgitation, and women on their cycle. I mean, they humiliated us and demeaned us, and they washed us down and looked at our naked bodies and threw our naked bodies over. And remember, King James, before he had the book commissioned, he wrote a book on necromancy and witchcraft. He was heavily involved in that, and he was gay. So his sexuality, his sensuality, his sociology, his psychology, and whatever spirituality he had is mixed in the way that book is interpreted around the world, and particularly in the Western world. So we have a lot of digging to do to unearth, to excavate, and investigate and interrogate our own selves as to why we believe what we believe, how we came to these assumptions and presumptions. It's going to take a lot of work to do that, but the Black church has the first corporate way that Black people could be accepted and gain approval from white people is by becoming Christians and good slaves. Slaves, obey your masters. So religion, we try to gear our religion around what the white man wanted. And first, they wanted to rob us of our spirituality, of our ability to transcend, to put hexes and curses and blessings, because we were around that hundreds of years. That's part of our spirituality. So they crippled us in a lot of ways, and modern day preachers are not aware of this, or either they ignore it. We have to be very careful the way we respond to our white event, particularly Southern Baptist influence. That's the largest Protestant denomination on the planet. And in this country, it has heavy influence. And that's where slavery has its base, in Southern Baptist mentality. And we have to sort through. I've been doing a lot of thinking about this, especially since Trump became president, and how the Black church has the fingerprints and the footprints of its racist founders. Because we tried from AME on to make the white man like us. And the first time we got his approval was when we sang or said, "Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so." And the same Bible says, slaves, obey your masters, even if they're mean and rough. Submit to them and do it as unto the Lord, as unto the Lord. So they made slavery a religious discipline, if not a spiritual one. So we have to dig through all of that to be humble and loving and forgiving and turn the other cheek and let them use us. Now, sexuality in the church, because we're breeders, they didn't mind us breeding among each other in the early days. They didn't mind us having sex. And you didn't hear of same-sex attractions or eroticism in those days, but it existed, even if more pronounced among white people, looking at our bodies and our booties and our boobs. There's a lot of things that nobody ever discusses that shouldn't go unnoticed in this conversation. Maybe not all tonight, but as we continue it through the rest of time, as we create another testament.
To move this conversation even further, particularly something that Bishop-elect Troy has said with regards to the Black church, and that this has to be laid at the feet of the Black church because of the control issues that the Black church has. And this is a book about the Black church. I know that people keep saying this is not just only the Black church, but we're talking about the Black church tonight, saints. Amen. And so the question comes up, has the complexity of sexuality in the Black church really evolved? Is it more violent? Is it or subtle? There's been very little healing or intention of acceptance still. Would you like to weigh in?
I mean, this is a great question, right? If the backdrop for the book and so many of the conversations were around a concern with homosexuality or same-sex marriage, right? Many of the conversations we had early on leading to the book were, well, actually, we need to have a bigger conversation about gender, right? It's still the case that in certain Black denominations, women, right, can't be ordained or serve as pastors. It's still right. And so right. And that's part of why we chose the language of sexual politics rather than sexuality, is to recognize that when we're talking about sexuality, we're already always talking about gender and vice versa, right? Even as right. And so we want to hold those two things in conversation together. And what also came up in those conversations, right, is that And I don't know if this so much answers the question as evolving. I think in many ways, Bishop Pearson spoke to this in a definitive way, right? As long as there's been church and there's been people in church, there's been all kinds of sex in church, right? Because wherever there's people and there's sex. Now, how have the kind of conversations around sexuality shifted and evolved within the context of Black churches? I think that reflects the sort of evolution across time and space of history, right? I mean, one of the chapters in the book captures the fact that in early 20th century, Wallace Best's chapter on the Reverend Clarence Cobb captures that, right? There's ostensibly an out gay Black pastor who's also a power broker in Chicago city politics, right? And so and I think, Wallace in gestures in this direction to suggest that, in fact, there was more space for out queer Black folk at that particular moment. Now, we can argue about that, right? So I think part of what the book also tries to suggest is that, right, to attend to these questions, we have to sometimes dig down into the specifics of particular moments in time and space and capture the ways in which individual churches, individual clergy, individual lay folk are navigating, right? Figuring out how to live their life in the midst of a set of debates about the day and in the midst of a set of possibilities within different churches, right? So certainly it's evolved. I saw one of the comments earlier reference the kind of policy debates that are happening in the AME church over the last couple of years around marriage, right? And so yes, right, the AME church is having a different kind of debate that has been pushed and argued for by a number of church leaders, right, and lay people. So certainly conversations are evolving, but there's, there are also ways in which there might, they move, those conversations evolve in different directions. So I think it is difficult to suggest that the evolution is one of a neat path towards progress, but it does, certainly there is change across time and space in this regard.
Thank you. Bishop-elect Troy, Bishop Pearson, go ahead.
The don't ask, don't ask, don't tell mentality has prevailed in the church for many, many years. In the last 25 to 30 years, people talking about sexuality, sensuality, not just same-sex eroticism or attractions or orientations, but people living together outside of wedlock, our stars, our movie stars, our entertainers. It's pretty common now to see a couple on television with 3 children and the mother's pregnant and the husband and mother, the father and mother say, we're thinking about getting married. And they've already got 4 kids and they've been living together for 20 years. That's acceptable in the culture. The church has known about sexuality, but it's like, keep it quiet. Just don't come in here talking about you want to get married. I mean, if you're going to be gay on your own. You're queer, you're funny, keep it quiet. But they're saying, no, this is the information highway, not the information lie way. Here's who I really am. I want you to accept me as I am. If you don't, I love this person, male or female, same sex or heterosexual. I love this person. I'm not ready to marry, but I'm living with them. We're sharing a bank account. We're getting to know each other. Now, as long as you don't tell us, we're cool. And we can know you're doing it. But if you tell it and it becomes your testimony and our children hear about it, that's when we say, all right, hold. Now keep that to yourself. Your old grandmother used to, hush, boy, you don't know what you're talking about. Hush your mouth. Be quiet. Leave that to it where you found it, that kind of thing. So this quietness, the silence is out there. And now we're living with a generation that says, to hell with all that. This is who I am. Shout, say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. Shout it loud, I'm gay and I'm proud. Say it loud, I'm not married, but I'm in love and I'm proud. Say it loud, I got a kid out of wedlock and I'm proud. I take a joint and I'm proud. I chew a gummy and I'm proud. I go to parties and I'm proud. That whole spirit is in the church today, white and Black. But the Blacks have been real good about this. Shh. From the Underground Railroad on, keep quiet. Don't be a tattletale. Don't tell everything you know. Don't say everything you know. Hush your mouth. Keep it to yourself. We don't need to know your business. In other words, We don't want to know your business, because if we know your business, we have to confront you. If I know you're gay, I can't let you usher. If I know you're married outside, if you're living outside of marriage, I can't let you be on my board. Now, I can take your tithe and your offerings, and I'll pray for you, but you can't have leadership and be known as gay or living outside of marriage with somebody you love. So that's something the church is still sorting through. And we're not the ones that are making that decision. The younger people are saying, you either take me or accept me as I am, or you won't see me again. I'm out of here. We need to have some of these younger people sometimes.
Absolutely. I can tell you right now, but I think that we might be a little bit afraid of some of the things that the young people gonna say when they get up here. I know a lot of them, and I'm really cool with them, and they tell me things, but they're not gonna come up here and say certain things because they feel like they're gonna be shunned. They feel like we say we're inclusive, but are we really? Right? And so, I understand that, but go ahead, Bishop-elect Troy.
No, I just wanted to say, I think that we have to start with the for me, I start at the point that one of the handicaps of the sacred text is that the sacred text does not do well with dealing with the notion of the evolution of change. We think that change is just one time thing, or this thing that we wake up and things have changed. The truth is, sex and sexuality is evolving as we speak. I dare say in 50 years, the way we see sex and sexuality will be very different than the way we see it now. And I think a part of the challenge is that we can't quite name it because it is still becoming. It is still unraveling. It's still revealing itself. And because we bring that notion of evolution to it, whatever we speak to now, however we frame it, will be limited in 20 to 25 years. We'll have to revisit it again. The text is limited on how it deals with race relations. The text is limited on how it deals with a number of contemporary issues. Things are changing and people are changing. And even though it might have been present in years past, the fact that we have all of these options now create these openings for people to define themselves for themselves. And I think we have to sit with that notion that we cannot create this one way to name sex. I heard Josef talk about gender expression. The ways in which gender expression shows itself, the ways in which we're giving birth to this whole system of androgyny, and the way we don't have a lot of definitions because we are becoming the same ways they taught me in seminary, right? That the first century church didn't have a sacred text because they were writing it. I think we're doing the same thing now, even around sex and sexuality, and we have to lean in, my opinion, to the intersections of spirituality and sexuality versus the ways in which they differ. I think that they're the same exact thing, two sides of the same coin. You show me somebody who's deeply spiritual, I'll show you someone who's deeply either sexual or sensual, because it flows in my mind from the same notion.
That's good, Bishop-elect Troy.
I agree 100%. And in the Black church, we are, particularly the Pentecostal church, we are the exotic form of Christianity. We're the extravagant embellishers. We exaggerate and exacerbate almost. And when we are shouting and vocalizing and physically demonstrating and moving and jumping in, it's very sensual. Our worship, at least the Pentecostal brand, is quite sensual and sexual and spiritual and social. The experience itself on Sunday morning. I remember many times watching the women shout, the boobs was bouncing, the butt was bouncing, and the saints would tell us to quit looking and tell the kids to look away, and the preachers was to pick up their Bibles and start looking like the Lord gave them a text, so the audience wouldn't see them looking at the woman's butt. And when she was shouting and quickening and bouncing, so there was something very exciting and erotic, even orgasmic and climactic about our worship experience. And it was hard. A person who's passionate in the pulpit will generally be passionate in the bedroom. And a lot of preachers are passionate in the pulpit, but their wives weren't, or their spouses weren't. And so they lived out their expression with the other members of the church. I remember particularly as I alluded to earlier, my grandfather sleeping with the women in the church, and he founded the church. It was the pastor of the church and had a lot of authority. And Solomon we're taught he's the wisest man that ever lived. 700 wives, 300 concubines. You know,
Is that the biblical message on sexuality right there?
right? Yeah. Well, are we thinking about all?
Don't answer. Don't answer. Don't answer. Don't answer it.
Well, the way we address that is we said, well, yeah, but his last book, he opened it saying vanity, vanity, all is vanity. You know, swinging garden, hanging gardens, all of that. He ends up by saying it's meaningless. That's a very sad, somber, my least favorite scripture in the Bible. Vanity, vanity, for man that we're called the wisest, richest, had all the women, all the wine, all the wealth. And yet he ends his life by saying vanity. That's a whole program, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So this woman, Sherry Moore, says, I'm Black, queer, gender fluid, femme, ordained clergy. I reside in Oklahoma, and for the past 10 years, I've been attending and working in affirming churches. To this day, I continue to feel disenfranchised, fetishized, tokenized in all of the denominations, UCC, DOC, AME, etc. Black women, femmes are often disregarded and disrespected in church. Black church is soul draining for us in ministry.
Wow.
Mm.
It's very sad.
As they say, that's a word.
It is. It sits.
It's also a reality. And as
It's a reality.
Excuse me?
Go
It's
ahead,
a
Bishop.
word.
Yes, it's a reality. Yes.
It's a word. And shamefully, realistically, it's a reality. She's saying something that a lot of them don't say, who are treated the same way. They're in ministry, they're ordained, they're active in their churches, but they still feel the stigmata, or the stigma, I should say, of being same gender a loving person. The gay, they'll grin in their face, shake their hand, let the minister say, well, you know, he's gay. She ain't straight. She's those little whispers, and they'll be there for a while. We got to give the church and the world a chance to shift. I know, again, and all of you will know that on television commercials, more than any other time in the history of television, you see integrated couples and gay couples. I don't know who's behind it. There's some kind of agenda that's making that, as Bishop Troy alluded to, in a few years from now, how we view these kinds of things will be dramatically different. The kids that are born today, the children who were born while Obama and Michelle were leading the country, as president and first lady, that's their first experience of the presiding office in this country. They'll never forget that. That's how they were introduced to America. Since then, you see same-sex couples, you see integrated couples. Our world is so different today than it just was just 20 years ago. And it's changing quite rapidly. So this conversation is very appropriate. The book, Josef, is very, very appropriate now. Think about when I was working with the human, what's the name of it, Troy? The Human Rights
Campaign.
Human Rights Campaign. Mm-hmm. HRC.
Yeah. HRC. Yeah, they sent me to Morehouse, and they sent me to the female college next door. My mind went
Spelman.
Mm-hmm. And I wondered why. It never crossed my mind that either of those schools might have a significant number of same-gender loving students. They were so bright and brilliant, and you know, they were pre-med students and pre-law students, and they were very normal, natural, smart, articulate, charismatic, bright young people, and they were unashamedly gay. And they alluded to their experiences in and outside the church. My whole perspective was enlightened when I went there, because these young men and women wouldn't let me be coy. I had to be open and listen and hear what they had to say. They were in my face, and they weren't mean, but I was learning. I was to go there and encourage them, but I really learned.
Yeah,
and I think I was stretched and enlightened among these young people, and they're very solidly who they are, and they represent the Black church. They're in it. Many of them were ministerial students. Some of them are in the ministry now. And same gender loving. Now, I don't know if they're openly gay. Most of them aren't. And the ones who are open aren't in the traditional churches, because a lot of the pastors are not bothered with it. It's the parishioners or the children church workers, or the families with younger children that don't want a gay Sunday school teacher, or a gay couple leading the youth group. Though that's in the Black and white church. Mm-hmm. And so we have to keep it loud keep it long, keep it out there, and literally almost force the church to reform by not just making sexuality less judged and judgmental, but making homophobia less popular.
No, and I think that's exactly right. And I think that's, I mean, it's interesting. It took 10 years for this book to get done. And I'm grateful that everyone who contributed stuck with me as it took me a while to, put the finishing touches and get it out. But when it was first being written, there was a sense that this was the hot topic, right? Because the whole nation was talking about marriage equality, right? And so everyone, including Black pastors, had to say something, right? Like you couldn't, and now we're not in that same moment, right? And sometimes folks said something helpful, sometimes folks said something hateful, right? But now I think that we're in a different moment where there isn't the same sort of public discourse that's pushing people to take a position one way or another.
Yeah.
And I think that in some ways is a real opportunity that I hope the book provides a space to have different kinds of conversations, right? And I think, there is work that's, still being done. And I think it's much more at the grassroots level where it's always been being done before it was a national debate. And I hope that, for the range of Black churches and even beyond, that the edit volume can be a resource for folk who are pastors and lay people who are trying to walk through these kinds of questions with their congregations, or individuals who are trying to walk through these kinds of questions in the context of their own identity, in their own sexual identity, but in their own spiritual identity, right? Like in their own religious identity, trying to sort through the relationship between spirituality, sensuality, sexuality, as Bishop Pearson started us off. And I hope that, and I think we do have a real opportunity to do that.
Who are some of the contributors, Josef?
Yeah, I know them by name, but I don't want to get anybody, you never want to start protocol and then leave out the important folks.
Exactly, but
right?
there are a lot. Monica Coleman is in here.
But identify them so they're
I can. So, and I will say that your frequent co-host, Bishop Yvette Flunder, who was unable to be with us this evening, her words are some of the first. She was gracious in blurbing the book, and so one of the first words on the first page of the book, you can't see it because my screen is blurred. Bishop Flunder's there, but the book begins with a conversation featuring Victor Anderson, a professor and ethicist at Vanderbilt, Serene Jones, the president of Union Theological Seminary in New York, Barbara Savage, professor at University of Pennsylvania, and myself and Kathy Cohen, political scientist who's written on HIV/AIDS, one of the first really important books on AIDS and the breakdown of Black politics, a political scientist at Chicago. But if we go through Nisha Jr., Michael Brown, who we've talked about, Jonathan Lee Walton, I know a good friend of yours, Bishop Pearson, who's the Divinity School Dean, who I was texting with a little earlier, Wallace Best, who we've mentioned at Princeton, Monique Moultrie at Georgia State, Melinda Price, University of Kentucky, Valerie Purdy Greenaway, my colleague, psychologist here at Columbia, Monica Coleman, a theologian at University of Delaware, Luke Powery, Duke Divinity School, Dean of the Chapel at Duke Divinity School. What's fascinating to me, when this book started, so many of us were just starting out in our careers. And now all these folks are holding endowed chairs. They've all jumped through tenure. Some of them are deans. It's pretty remarkable, the story of the folks in the book. Brad Braxton, who we all know, and then Derek McQueen, who is also a good friend of ours and a pastor, out Black gay pastor of a Black Presbyterian church here in Harlem, and associate director of CARS. The book ends before my afterword with him interviewing Dennis and Christine Wiley, right, who are on the front lines of marriage equality campaigns and in leading Black churches in this direction in DC. It's remarkable, like the range of voices, and I'm really proud and glad to be able to call these folks friends.
Yes, Bishop-elect Troy has a question for you. Before you ask that question, Bishop-elect Troy, we want you to know we are giving away the book tonight. We're giving away 2 books. Make sure you put hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers so that you can win the book. Again, hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers. It's all one word. So if you leave a space in there, it will not register. Hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers, all one word. Bishop-elect Troy?
Yeah, so Josef, I was particularly intrigued about in the book the section that talks about kind of how we preach what we preach and the ways in which it gets teased out into sexual politics within the Black church. I was curious about, could you say more about as preachers, as theologians, as pastors, the way we interrogate the text, the way we preach the text, how does that connect to this whole conversation around sexual politics in the Black church?
Yeah, I wish that Brother Brad and Luke, who write these really brilliant chapters on the art of preaching, as well as the Wileys, who talk about their experience of preaching and pastoring their congregation, right? And Dennis talks about what he calls straight flight, right? The fact that so many straight folk left after sort of trying to make the church more inclusive on gender and sexuality. I guess what I'll say is two things about, I think in looking at Dr. Braxton and Dr. Powery's chapter, we get two different very powerful examples about how pastors might go about this, right? I think you get, first you have Luke's chapter really begins by troubling the what we talked about at the beginning, right? The assumption of somehow body being in opposition to spirit. Right, and to do this, Luke begins right by reading Black literature. He takes us to that powerful passage in Toni Morrison's Beloved, the scene of Baby Suggs preaching in the clearing, right, where she's not preaching a sermon, go and sin no more, right? She's preaching a sermon of love your flesh, right? And so I think there's so many things in that chapter, but just the power of Black literature as a resource, and this I think has always been part of the Black preaching tradition. Maybe not to preach about bodies and sexuality, but I think what Luke does is foreground that we can't have spirits if we're not talking also about bodies. Those two are intimately connected. I think Brad takes a really different approach, and he's, I think, what might be read as maybe a little more provocative, right? He sort of wants to invite the congregation to think about sexual intimacy, right? Which makes folks uncomfortable in church, right? The fact that, right, well, not everyone, but a whole lot of folk in church have sex, right? Like that. And we somehow don't like to have that erotic dimension of ourselves explicitly named in the context of the congregation, right? I think we've already said that it's always there already in the worship and the dancing and the shouting that is often sexualized, but we have a way of talking around it. And I think what Brad's chapter does powerfully is, right, I think you can think of it as a way of, I'm remembering that powerful whining song from the 1980s of breaking up the fallow ground, right? And so Brad just basically names it explicitly, right? We're going to talk about sex in the pulpit, and there's no easy way to do that, and that may get you to lose some members, right? But how do we actually, right, invite those different kinds of conversations so that the church is a resource for some of the most important parts of their members' lives? And I think that and I guess what I want to underscore by even just mentioning both of those chapters is that there isn't a single way to do it. And it requires, I think, really, even before preaching, the pastor, the preacher, to listen and to hear the congregation, right? And to take cues from where the congregation is and take the risk of where, how best to enter that conversation in the context of the congregation they're serving.
I think a lot of people still think that same-gender gay people of the LGBT community is afflicted with either demons or mental illness. That's a general unspoken subtlety within the Black church. And we tolerated or managed that, but we didn't know how pained and hurt and penalized same-gender loving people were. We didn't know about the suicides and the beatings, and because they didn't tell it. We didn't hear these stories. Now we're learning how cruel and insensitive and vicious the church has been. We should be the most compassionate, and we haven't been, and we've not understood. And being compassionate towards somebody you don't understand doesn't mean approving of what they're doing. If they're an alcoholic or a drug addict, and unfortunately, we always put sexual sins in the same category as all sins.
Pathology.
Especially say sexuality. We make it the worst of the worst.
Yep.
Why? We haven't even discussed that yet. But we have drinkers and drug users and adulterers and people that are. I had men in my church, I didn't realize it, that were very close to me hitting the girly bars. Married men. It just never crossed my mind that most of those men were married, close to me, would be doing girly bars. I didn't even know they existed. That's how naive I was in my town here. Josef, when you
absolutely. No, absolutely.
I was all Jesus and the Holy Ghost and preaching and revival. I just didn't. I was out of touch with reality, and and I think I speak for a lot of preachers that are not mean or mad. They're just ignorant.
Yeah.
No, I think it means to not know. It means to not notice or to not note of. We try to ignore it, and what you're saying in your book and what we've been discussing repeatedly, and again, I'm learning a lot. Stop ignoring this reality.
Well, right, and I think we're incentivized and taught to talk around it or look away from it, right?
Yes.
Right, because there's a vested interest in keeping everybody in the church there, and
keeping the control, like Troy said, it's really about control. But Roland Stringfellow works with, he's an MCC pastor, but he works with the fellowship quite a bit. He does a lot of work around sex and sexuality. And so he has a very good question. And I want to make that the last question we ask for tonight.
Absolutely.
The Black church is aging. Somebody say amen. Don't act like it ain't happening.
Amen.
All right. And COVID has been a challenge for many to survive.
Yeah.
Do you feel Black church is ready to pass on this institution to the next generation?
I'll say something quickly, but I want to defer to the church leaders on the screen today in making this call. At first, to recognize, absolutely, COVID has hit all of our churches hard, right? I mean, first of all, it's hit all of us hard, and we've all lost folks we care deeply about, right? And as we know with so many things, often it's our folks, our churches that are hurt hardest because of the positions of vulnerability that we already occupy in light of that long history of white supremacy that we talked about. So I don't want to just skirt over the degree to which the very real death toll that churches have had to navigate, right, over the past couple of years as places that funeralize the dead, right? And the fact that we haven't, the limits and constraints for doing that is something that, we want to, I just acknowledge and recognize. In fact, right, the book itself is dedicated to a sister who worked with us for so long, a young sister who died in the process of the book being finished, Sister Janisha Gabriel. Powerful believer in the fullness of all Black lives, as the dedication names. And so I appreciate us turning here, but I just want to, I guess, recognize that and respect that loss that we're all still sitting with and working through. I think to the question of what this means for the next generation, I don't know that there's an easy answer, right? I've been part of a lot of projects over the years that recognize, and I don't know that this is so much the case in Black churches, right? That in the context of American Christianity, there's a whole lot of churches in which there are not pastors to lead them, right? And we can all think about in the towns we're in, churches that are now nightclubs or condominiums or what have you, right? That speak to migration patterns in urban centers, but also the fact that not as many people, right? We can also think about the seminaries that have closed, the freestanding seminaries, and there's, right, because there's not as many rushing into the pulpit as there were in years past. I think this does have some impact on Black churches, but it's certainly not the same degree, right? The Black pastor, the pastorate is maybe not the prized profession as it was in early years in the ways when Du Bois documented the Black church at the turn of the 20th century alongside education. But there are still, right, the same dynamic of the decline of the church has not hit Black churches. So I think Black churches have often been preoccupied with keeping young folk, as all church are, as a mechanism for keeping the church alive. But retirement is always not an easy thing to talk about. And so the question of how that generational torch will be passed is a real one. So that was more than I wanted to say, but it really was just a setup to hear what the religious leaders say, what the pastors, the bishops on the line might want to say about this topic.
So I think for me, I'm not quite a bishop yet.
Sorry,
honor,
bishop-elect, and then the bishop.
I honor Bishop Pearson. But when you were talking, one of the things, and Bishop Pearson, I'm sure you probably will remember this as well. I locate myself, most of us, in the deep South or Pentecostal church. There was a lot of language growing up around the changing of the guard. Like I heard that so often growing up about there's a changing of the guard coming. And it was an alluding to the fact that there was another level of leadership that would be brought onto the platform. What I did not hear in that same conversation was in order for the guard to change, somebody had to die. Typically, it was connected to some sense of loss or separation. And I think that to answer Roland's question, I don't think the church is quite ready, but I don't think we're not ready because of tokenism type of things. I think it's questions of identity, isolation, and insecurity. I think there's a lot of identity connected to roles as senior leaders. And when that time comes for leaders to have to look at passing the baton or giving way to new leadership, there's questions of identity get called into place. And I don't think sometimes we really sit with that reality of how much investment has been made in that. So identity is an issue. And then isolation, we're in silos in so many ways. While we talk about the church as this organism or organization, we're definitely still separated. And insecurity is, I'm not just naming, I want to be clear, not just about insecurity around people's insecurities of themselves, but financial insecurity.
Yeah.
We're talking about preachers, pastors, and leaders who have given all of themselves to this work, but didn't have retirement plans or 401k plans. So the conversation about thinking about what next will look like, there's some financial tentacles to that if I give this up, how will I live? And those coming on after me, how will they live? And Bishop Flunder often says that the relationship of a founder to a work is very different than the one who come after a founder, because a founder will sell everything to make sure the work goes forward, right? But someone else coming after a founder doesn't have that same kind of investment. So I think that we've not done a lot of work around planning for what does life after the pulpit. Most preachers who get into ministry think I'm gonna die in it. And we wear that as a badge of honor versus the ways in which we have to go and reimagine what does relationship with the church look like as it evolves. And I'll call it again, Bishop Pearson's song and the project about there are people who don't want to cross over, but they have that responsibility to hold hands between what was and what will be. And that's a tenuous place.
It's a difficult one.
There's no evolution without dissolution. And the whole planet is evolving. And a lot of things are dissolving before our very eyes. We're all suffering from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. In the last 2 years, I read a statistic last week that over 20,000 churches have closed since COVID. 4,000 preachers not just resigned from the ministry, but changed professions, alluding to what Troy was saying regarding income and finances. Volunteerism is down. Attendance is down. Pentecostal people are used to an electrifying service, but we're not used to an electric service. And so an electric church. I can't get no help up in here. Ain't nobody up in there to give you help. Turn to your neighbor and tell, ain't no neighbor. And so we're empty. Hammond B3 helping us tune up. We can't put on our show. So psychologically, there's a lot of men and women that are needing therapy. First, we're trying to talk to each other like this. These guys are depressed and they're frightened. And I'm finding more and more young people who just aren't interested. First, I found that offensive. Then I found it frightening. And now I find it enlightening. Why are they not interested? Now, I'm a baby boomer. I'm the oldest one here. You all might remember those little Sunday school cards that they gave us when you went to Sunday school with your, what's our subject of our lesson? And what's the memory verse this moment? And what's the scripture? You know, we grew up around that. These kids don't know anything about that. Sunday school is playing games and computers. And so they don't teach the stories. They don't have the discipline. It's just not, that's a 20th century expression and experience that doesn't fit in the 21st century well, or if at all. This is not the same church. I was born, as I often say, halfway through the last century, 1953. I'm 22 years into the next century. I don't even know what's going on. So it's like, I'm not trying to bring something into this century. I left the wardrobe in the last century. I'm trying to find out what to wear. We're all learning.
We appreciate you, Bishop.
Okay, y'all pray my strength, because I don't know what the hell is going on. I'm trying to be holy. I can't even quicken right. It seems like the quicken. So
I hear you, Bishop.
The resolution is important, and we're saying it in jest because we don't know what else to do. We're laughing to keep from crying, but it's just not the same. And I'm talking to literally dozens of preachers, sometimes daily, that are saying, Doc, what do we do? What do we go? You warned us that this was coming. Now what? Yeah. I have preachers that are saying, Doc, I can't adjust to going back to church every Sunday anymore. Because a lot of guys are saying, listen, I'm doing much better online. I don't have to raise no offering. I just receive it. It comes in easily. I don't have to pay any bills, no staff, no parking attendants, no children's workers, no youth department, no staff meetings. My expenses are down, but I make enough to take care of me and my spouse and my children. I ain't doing it no more. And they're saying that to me. They hope it never changes. And millions of people are staying at home, literally feeling the anointing of the Holy Ghost in bed with the drawers on and in pajamas, sipping tea and, eating cream of wheat on Sunday morning. And we watching us online. If you don't like this kind, you can go and find all kind of praise.
Bishop, not eating cream of wheat. Not eating cream of wheat. Come on now.
There's nothing wrong with you don't eat cream of wheat in the morning. Y'all eating all this healthy stuff. Talking about protein drink. Give me some oatmeal and cream of wheat and leave me alone.
Bishop-elect Vanessa is getting late.
So I'm getting ready to go. I was going to say, really, Josef, first of all, thank you. Thank you so much. It's been an incredible conversation tonight. And I want to actually give you the privilege to actually give the final word, give a final statement to us tonight.
Well, first of all, my statement will be gratitude. Thank you for having me, including me in this format. I know she's not with us, but my thoughts are celebrating with Bishop Flunder, who's a dear friend and sister. And it's great to make new friends tonight, and Bishop Troy, and be back with old friends, Bishop-elect Troy, Bishop-elect Vanessa, and to be in conversation once again with my old pastor from the 1990s, not as far back in the earlier century. So I thank you for this conversation, for modeling it, for helping. This is the first event I've done for the book. So thank you for launching the book here. I can't think of a better place to do so. And goodness, this chat space has been crazy. Folks are involved in the conversation, and I hope that is a sign of more conversation to come. So thank you, Vanessa, my friend, who it's been a while since we ran into each other on the block at 120th, but I know we'll do that again. Thank you for making the conversation happen.
You are welcome. Bishop-elect Troy, Bishop Pearson, will you all have anything to say? Anything that you want to say? Last words. You muted, sir.
You have some of the most interesting friends you have brought. I've never been around so many really smart spiritual people. Scholarly, intellectual, philosophically, psychologically stable people. Some of them probably in therapy and on meds, but they come across really clear on this program.
I'm about to sign off. I love y'all.
I learned so much. I've always said about Bishop-elect Troy, how brilliant he is and how centered he is and how bold and authentic he is. and he's scholarly. So
Yes.
there's a lot of people, the ordination of this moment to discuss. We're helping to open up the 21st century to a new sense of reasoning and logistics and logic. And it's very powerful. It's very prophetic. It's ordained of the Lord. And we miss Bishop Flunder tonight. She's a pioneer in so many ways. So, and all of us are related to her. So this is really good. Don't you forget, Josef, God bless you. I'm going to send you a little tithe envelope. And
I'm going to send you my virtual tithe. It'll be a virtual tithe.
But I'll put an offering in there for your ministry. And
appreciate it.
I love you guys. Stay in touch.
Bishop-elect Troy?
No, I just wanted to say thank you to Josef for facilitating and starting this conversation that continues, and just to encourage all of us that we are evolving and we're becoming, and to embrace that and not see that as a negative.
Right.
We've had a lot of critique of the church, but I still think that the church still will evolve into whatever its next is. We may not have an idea of what that looks like, but certainly God is not at a loss for that. And so I just appreciate conversations like this, because it really does challenge us that we have to continue to embrace change. So thank you for that. And thank you for including me in the conversation. It's been so rewarding for me.
Thank you for your yes, each and every one of you. And thank you, Beyond the Gatekeepers, for being with us here on tonight. It's been an incredible conversation. We're still asking you to make sure that you put hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers if you want to win the book. But we want to make sure that we advertise, and we have people that advertise with us, and we want to make sure that we acknowledge them tonight. Beyond the Gatekeepers tonight has gone on. We thank God for Josef, Sorett, and all of those that have come to be a part. And we ask for your about broadcast by sending in a donation to us via Cash App to $TFAM annual, or to our PayPal, which is www.paypal.me/TFAM justice. We could use your support so that we can lift this program up and take it to other venues and other places. Thank you so much for what you are going to give on tonight and even in the weeks to come. We want you to save the date. On July 12th through the 16th, we are going to be in Phoenix, Arizona for our TFAM Leadership Conference 2022. Early registration is $100. It ends May 1st. Regular registration is $125. It ends July 1st. And on-site registration is $150. You can go online to the TFAM Conference 2022. You can go to our website. You can also go to our app and find all the information about joining us at the Arizona Biltmore Resort in Phoenix, Arizona. The room rate is $119 per night, and the theme is Have We Got Good Religion?
Hello everyone, this is Jess Dominic, owner of Bullet in Flight Radio, your story, our station. A proud supporter of progressive Christians from around the world. So please join us every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. until 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for the best in gospel house, gospel indie, and inspirational word. And if you're looking to submit your music or sermons, please send us an MP3 and artist pick to bulletinflightpros@gmail.com. All submissions are free. Thank you for tuning in, and God bless.
Please donate to your church. Lifestyle Global Properties presents Donate to Your Church. Give to your church while accomplishing your goal of home ownership. Lifestyle Global Properties will donate 10% of the commission earned from your real estate transaction to your choice of City of Refuge or TFAM in your name when you utilize their brokerage to purchase or sell a property, residential or commercial, in California or Georgia. And the proprietor of this particular business is Antonio Mattier. If you want to get in touch with them, you want to sell your property, you want to give a commission to TFAM or City of Refuge, please contact him and his company, Lifestyle Global Properties. TNT, Tuesday Night Talks, RIM Fellowship, United Church of Christ for RIM Virtual Experience. You can go to www.rimatlanta.org. Bishop-elect Sonia E. Williams is their senior pastor, and every Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for everyday real, relevant Bible-led conversations. You can find them on Facebook, Instagram, and on YouTube at RIM Fellowship UCC. Thank you for patronizing the Healing Place Apothecary. Tonight is Nubian Flunder's birthday. She is having a special for today only. Remember, California is 3 hours behind, so if you're in California, you still have time to make a purchase. There's like a serious discount going on tonight of her product. Again, the Healing Place Apothecary. Go to www.thepthehealingplaceapothecary.com to make sure that you patronize this business. She is the daughter of our presiding bishop. And of course, we have Sky Michelle's Teas and Things. If you need a t-shirt, if you need a mug, or anything else that you need made, go to www.skymichelle.com. That's www.skymichelle.com, where Sky Michelle is the kid boss. You can follow her on Facebook or her Instagram page at I Am Sky Michelle. There you will find collections of Dope Black t-shirts. Dope Black is Black History Month, but you can wear those shirts anytime. Faith t-shirts with faith quotes, YA Flunder quotes, Kara motivational quotes, and she can customize your t-shirt, your sweatshirt, or whatever it is that you want to purchase. Please make sure that you patronize this little girl, 8 years old. God bless. Kara Solutions, focus on your passion. Let Kara handle the rest. Owner and proprietor and founder is Susan A. Webley. She does remote production and video conferencing, admin and tech support, custom branding, show development, training. Please visit her website at www.kara-solutions.com, or you can email her for a free consultation at sue@kara-solutions.com. If you want to advertise with Beyond the Gatekeepers, please email us at beyondthegatekeepersshow@gmail.com. That's beyondthegatekeepersshow@gmail.com. Thank you so much for being a part of this show on tonight. And we're going to make sure that we do the raffle tonight. So if you have put the hashtag in, hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers, we will see who the two winners are right now. Well, I know him. Pastor Kevin E. Tyndall is the winner. Pastor Kevin, congratulations. Please go to the Beyond the Gatekeepers page, to our inbox. Make sure you give your name and your address so that we can send you out that book. Thank you. Our next winner will be Tanya D. Jackson. Congratulations, Tanya. You are a winner. Please go to Beyond the Gatekeepers page in the inbox. Give us your address, and we'll make sure that you get the book. Thank you so much, everyone, for supporting the show on tonight. We appreciate your support. We say God bless you, and we will see you on next week.
Very much.